Imagine standing on a stretch of southern soil where one side belongs to North Carolina and the other to South Carolina. You're standing on an invisible line that splits more than land. It divides cultures, identities, economies, and a shared name with an ancient grudge. But why? Why are there two Carolinas? Why does one place carry the same name twice, split apart and standing alone? This isn't just a geographic accident. It's the story of colonists and kings, rebellion and rivalry, pride and politics, a long-forgotten tale of how one land became two states, with one name and a deeply divided soul. To understand why Carolina was ever one to begin with, you have to go back long before the birth of the United States, back to when America was still wild, uncharted territory. The year was 1663. The British Empire was growing restless. King Charles II had just regained the throne after years of civil war and exile. To reward the loyal supporters who helped him reclaim power, he granted a massive tract of land in the American Southeast to 8 of his allies. These men were called the Lords Proprietors, and the land they were given stretched from present-day Virginia down to Spanish-controlled Florida. This enormous region he named Carolina after himself, Charles or Carolus in Latin. But the land was far from empty. It was home to powerful Native American nations, the Catawba, the Tuscarora, the Yamasee, and many more who had thrived there for centuries. The English crown, however, saw this territory as ripe for settlement and profit. The Lords Proprietors set out to attract European colonists who would tame the land, build plantations, and establish trade. In return, the proprietors would rule as mini kings over their new territory, collecting taxes and shaping laws as they pleased. From the very beginning, Carolina was a challenge. It was vast, wild, and hard to govern from across the Atlantic. The settlers who came to the northern part of Carolina were mostly poor English farmers and Virginians seeking fresh land. They cleared forests, built cabins, and farmed tobacco in scattered, self-sufficient communities. These settlers valued independence. They distrusted authority, avoided cities, and wanted little interference from any especially distant English lords. Farther south, however, a different kind of society was taking root. Many of the settlers who moved to the southern part of Carolina came from the Caribbean island of Barbados, where they had run sugar plantations using enslaved African labor. These Barbadian planters brought with them money, ambition, and a brutal plantation model based on slavery. They founded the city of Charlestown, later Charleston, in 1670. And it quickly became the wealthiest port in the southern colonies. Rice, indigo, and enslaved Africans flowed in and out. Charleston became the beating heart of a wealthy, aristocratic, and racially stratified society. In contrast, the northern settlers lived in relative isolation, with few towns, fewer roads, and little centralized government. They hunted, farmed, and traded in tight-knit communities. Without a deep-water port like Charleston, they were cut off from major trade routes. They relied on barter, lived simpler lives, and saw their southern neighbors as haughty elites who had little in common with their frontier hardships. From the start, then, Carolina was two different colonies wearing the same name. The geography itself was divided. Thick swamps and dense forests made travel between north and south difficult. The people were different too, economically, culturally, and socially. The north grew slowly, organically, from the bottom up. The south was built quickly and strategically, from the top down, with the plantation system at its core. By the early 1700s, these differences began to tear the colony apart. The government, centered in Charlestown, had little interest in the needs of the North. Northern settlers complained they were ignored, taxed unfairly, and left unprotected from native attacks. Their petitions for support went unanswered. Meanwhile, The Southern elite saw the North as backward, unruly, and unprofitable. Resentment brewed on both sides. The colonial government was chaotic. The Lords Proprietors, ruling from England, were distant and ineffective. They had grand ideas for how Carolina should function, drawing up philosophical plans like the fundamental constitutions, a bizarre mixture of aristocracy and utopian theory. But these plans fell apart on the rugged ground of American reality. The people didn't want theoretical governments or noble classes. They wanted stability, safety, and local control. Matters came to a head with the Tuscarora War in 1711. The Tuscarora people, driven to desperation by land theft, enslavement, and unfair trade, launched an uprising against the northern colonists. The war was brutal, and the northern settlers begged the colonial government for military aid. Help was slow in coming. The South had little interest in helping the North's Indian troubles. Eventually, forces from South Carolina did assist, but the delay deepened the rift. Trust between the regions shattered. Shortly after, in 1715, the Yamasee War rocked the southern colony. Dozens of Native American tribes rose up against the southern settlers who had enslaved and exploited them. This time, the northern settlers stayed away. The sense of a shared identity was gone. The two regions no longer trusted one another, and both felt abandoned in their time of need. In 1712, the colony unofficially split. Two separate governments were created, one in Edmonton for the north, one in Charleston for the south. It wasn't yet an official split, but it marked the beginning of two Carolinas in everything but name. For nearly 2 decades, they operated under this dual structure, increasingly independent, but still technically one colony. By 1729, the experiment was over. Years of mismanagement, local rebellions, and dissatisfaction with the Lords Proprietors finally pushed the British Crown to act. King George II revoked the Proprietors' Charter and turned Carolina into 2 royal colonies, North Carolina and South Carolina each, with its own governor, assembly, and government. The split was not the result of a single battle or rebellion. It was the result of years of tension, difference, and dysfunction. The Carolinas had never truly been one. Now they no longer had to pretend. As royal colonies, North and South Carolina charted very different paths. South Carolina remained wealthy and aristocratic, its economy powered by slavery and plantation agriculture. Charleston became a cultural and commercial hub. The state leaned heavily into its elite planter identity, creating a powerful ruling class that would later lead it into secession during the Civil War. North Carolina, meanwhile, stayed more rural, more independent, and more egalitarian. Its economy was based more on small farms than plantations. Its people remained suspicious of centralized power and proud of their frontier spirit. It developed more slowly, without the flash of Charleston, but with a resilient and self-sufficient population. Still, both Carolinas shared key struggles. They both relied heavily on enslaved labor. They both displaced and destroyed native populations. And they both played major roles in the coming conflicts that would shape the United States from the American Revolution to the Civil War. During the Revolution, both Carolinas saw fierce fighting. Loyalists and patriots clashed in towns, forests, and backcountry roads. South Carolina saw more Revolutionary War battles than any other colony. North Carolina gave the world the Mecklenburg Declaration and some of the earliest calls for independence. Yet even after independence, the division between the states remained clear. They cooperated. Yes, they were neighbors, but they remained distinct. The lines drawn in 1729 had become more than political borders. They had become part of the identity. In the 19th century, as America fractured over slavery, the Carolinas again took divergent paths. South Carolina was the firebrand first to secede from the Union in 1860, first to raise arms in defense of the Confederacy. North Carolina hesitated, conflicted. Many of its citizens opposed secession. It joined the Confederacy reluctantly, only after Lincoln called for troops. Even during the Civil War, the difference between the Carolinas was evident. South Carolina was defiant. North Carolina was divided. After the war, both states struggled through Reconstruction, but their post-war identities remained shaped by their earlier choices. South Carolina clung to its plantation past. North Carolina evolved more steadily, with a growing focus on education, infrastructure, and industry. Today, the Carolinas exist as separate states with intertwined histories. They compete in sports, commerce, and tourism. They share mountains, rivers, and a coastal culture. But beneath the surface, the division still lingers. It's in the accents, the politics, the sense of pride and independence that each state holds for its own story. So, why did Carolina split into two states? The answer isn't simple. It wasn't one decision. It wasn't one moment. It was 100 moments of slow drift between two regions that never fully understood or accepted each other. It was economic, cultural, geographic, and political. It was about people-independent farmers in the north and ambitious planters in the south who looked at the same land and saw two very different futures. And yet, in some strange way, that split gave each Carolina its strength. It allowed North Carolina to grow in its own time, in its own way. It allowed South Carolina to build its vision, for better or worse. Together, they represent a fascinating experiment in what happens when a shared name hides a divided history. The next time you see those two names on a map, remember they weren't always separate, but they were never truly one. They are two stories carved from the same land. And the invisible line between them tells a tale as old as America itself. If this story made you see history differently, if it opened your eyes to how much can hide behind a name, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten truths of American history. Because sometimes, the answers to where we are lie in how we were split.